detected. Begin sequence.
Let's get into the series. We're going to go through these mags, so we're going to just point out some things that were pretty cool. And the first thing here on the right from the outset is this whole story on the front page here, can asteroids conquer Space Invaders? So that's what it was all about, you know, these very early games. And Space Invaders, Asteroids, Pac-Man, Centipede, you know, they were some of the earliest ones. Inside the TRS-80 color computer, we used to call that the Trash 80. That was the name of that computer. Strategy on Space Invaders and Breakout, unbelievable. And then Touchdown, of course, part of American football. So yeah, flicking over into this magazine, and it was funny, you know, Atari had this ongoing campaign because they licensed every single main arcade game name. So they had Space Invaders, they had Missile Command, you know, Warlords, Asteroids as part of this advert here, and they always used to, you know, talk that up. They're the ones that have got all the licenses. But yeah, Atari had it sewn up. And look at this, color set, box set of all these games, and I've been wanting to collect them all. Now I have to drag out my collection and see how far I've got on this list. I want to actually get all of these. And this from Epic, and they created this game called Crush, Crumble and Chomp, and this used to run on my Atari 800, and I had to put the basic cartridge in, so it ran on basic. Then we come into the first part of the magazine called Switch On, and a bit of an introduction from Bruce, no less, and he covers a few things, and of course this was the very first episode. And look at this, is did you know that you're a member of the world's fastest growing hobby group? It's true. It's like, you know, totally new. First Pong machine made its debut only a decade ago. Today, more than 5 million Americans regularly play electronic games. Only 5 million. That's just a handful, really, isn't it? And funnily enough, peppered in with these in the magazine were these little electronic devices, bridge players, and this little bridge electronic game. So then we get into the reader's reply, and they called it Reader's Replay. And a lot of messages here from game houses and stuff. So they must have gone around and, you know, let people know that they were starting up a video game magazine. And, you know, tons of people here, you know, excited that there is a magazine devoted to electronic games. Isn't it funny? There's just a major excitement about that. And yet today, you know, electronic games is just such a common term. Over the page, we're into Activision Tennis, and it wasn't a game that I ever bought on the Atari VCS, and of course Activision was a group of Atari programs that split out and did their own thing. This used to interest me when I get over and look at the Intellivision. So Intellivision always had to have these adverts that compared the Atari 2600 to the Intellivision graphics, and of course the Intellivision graphics looked awesome. The graphics looked good, but I think I remember that the actual smoothness of the gameplay actually wasn't that great, and that was something that the Atari 2600 did. I mean, there was so many things that they did right. They licensed all the original game names for the arcades, of course, as we just went through before, so that gave them the edge in terms of marketing for those things. But the games on the 2600 or the VCS were super smooth. I mean, even though they were sort of graphically very limited, they were super smooth, and the gameplay, and it was challenging and fun and fast, and, you know, and I'm pretty sure with the Intellivision it wasn't quite the same sort of experience from that point of view, but definitely looked better. This segment here called Inside Gaming, talking to David Crane of Activision. Yeah, he developed this game called Freeway, getting the chicken across the road. It was very much like a Frogger type of clone. But yeah, Activision did really well, those guys that left Atari and started up. The editor and co-publisher is the co-founder of this magazine, and that was Frank Langley Jr. He and Bill Knuckle, they're the guys that started it up. They're the editors. Those guys I have to thank sincerely for such an amazing magazine. And how's this? This is amazing. This is one of the first little references to an Easter egg in a game. So Atari confirms rumor secret messages exist. So this was in the adventure game, and if you did a certain type of action, then you revealed the name of one of the programmers, I believe. Moving over to the side, they talked about Atari's Red Baron, and then of course a reference there to Atari's Warlords. Moving over, there was looked like some sort of gaming event. What does it say here? Reportedly, high-power players who missed out on last year's hugely successful Space Invaders tournament are coming out of the woodwork to get a piece of this year's action. So there was Space Invaders tournaments. Wow. Stampede is a game that I've since played, but I never played it really back in the day. And it's sort of a cool little game on the 2600. We move over to ice hockey. And look down the bottom there, score 100,000 in Laser Blast and win a commission. Well, down the bottom there, that is the Laser Blast badge that I have, and I've got that badge with the 1 million extra little badge that goes underneath it. And I remember taking that photo, and I did cover that when I did the Atari shelf, showed you that badge that I got. Up the top, we have reference to a RAM disk for the Atari 800, of course, my most favourite computer. And of course, that computer came, started with 16K of memory. At an entry point, went up to 48K, which was the one that I had. And here's an amazing RAM disk for 128K. They had to do some form of bank switching, so they could only access, up to 48K at a time, because that's the way, the limits of the machine, and then they had to sort of bank switch, so you switch from that 48K to the next bank of 48K within the 128K. It works something like that anyway. And here is the advert for the original video magazine. How about that? A magazine that talks about video and what's on TV. Here covering some of those devices again. There was plenty of these electronic chess games and lots of these little watches. And I do have my own little Casio watch, which I'll have to share with you at some point. And how about this down the bottom here, the Saturn Space Invaders jacket. How cool were you if you could cruise down the street with wearing that jacket? And then over the other side here, we've got more little handhelds. We've got the Pocket Simon. Was pretty popular. Another Space Invaders t-shirt, and then a sort of a children's discovery toy thing. Check this out, Super Bingo. A home bingo machine. Wow, head-to-head boxing, a little handheld again. And then we had a lot of these little desk type arcade games. Alien Invaders, but it says Space Invaders on the box. Interesting. And then we got a horse race analyzer. A little special device just for analysing who wins and working that out. And right in the middle there, guys, look at that electronic detective. And then we had got Scrabble on the right. Look at that thing. Look at that Lexor Scrabble, unbelievable. And right down the bottom corner there, poking out, what is that? Well, that is one of the original Apples, right? That's the original Apple II, is it? The disk drives there, it's got a nice funky wooden case around the disk drives. Amazing. So this was the announcement here about the Tandy colour computer. So this must have been where it was first released in terms of this time frame when this magazine came out. And as I said, the original black and white one was terrible. This looks a little bit better. And into the Q&A, and you've got to laugh, guys. You've got to laugh at some of these questions. Look at this question: do video games damage television sets? Now actually, the funny thing is that that's not a silly question, because of course the CRTs will get burning if you leave a game on, as we know with the arcade monitors, right? So they did actually cover that in there. And of course, a lot of the arcade machines and the VCS used to do this as well. They used to color cycle. So if you left them just sitting there, they had built into the machine to color cycle the whole screen so that you wouldn't get burn-ins. And check this out, the quest for the rings. I mean, this is the sort of advert, guys, that I'd sit there, lying back in my bed, and I'd just be staring at this sort of thing and look at the artwork and just thinking, wow, what sort of game is this? This was for the Odyssey. How basic the Odyssey was, of course. Amazing that they had that whole game as like a sort of deep strategy game. It's one of those very, very early strategy games, but the graphics were so crude, but it was made up for with the story and all the supporting information. And there we go, the Odyssey, and it was the Odyssey 2 in fact, and there's a whole selection of all the games, but of course it just could never compete with the Atari. You know, Atari 2600 just had so many developers developing for it. So here we have a whole strategy session on how to zap more Space Invaders. Look at that cool artwork. Asteroids versus Space Invaders. Just love the artwork. So a whole article here talking about Space Invaders and asteroids. So the rest of the story here carries on talking about species and how asteroids sort of creeping into it. And then they talked about Galaxian, of course, souped up Space Invaders. And yes, Galaxian was that next game that just blew me away. Advert down here for a gamer pack. You get all 4 t-shirts here with Pac-Man, Missile Command, and Space Invaders and Asteroids. What next for electronic games? So we've got a bit of an insight here. We've got a bowling and stampede, ice hockey and boxing. So we've got a whole lot of VCS original Atari 2600 games that they were covering. And yeah, the graphics so crude. Look at the pricing here on the advert here for the Atari 800. So that was the Atari 800 I had. So I had the Atari 400 as well. So this was $759 US, and I guarantee that would have been for the 16K version, not the 48. And if you think about that, you know, that for in terms of Aussie dollars, we just look like today's exchange rate, you'd be over $1,000, but you're talking back in 1980, you know, that really would be up there in terms of price. I mean, I think in terms of inflation, someone could probably work it out for me, but it's probably, you know, it's good, what, 3,000 or so? That's probably the equivalent. We're about 3 times in terms of the equivalent value back then. So, you know, it was expensive. Maybe not that much, maybe 2.5, but it was still very expensive, right? And with the Player's Guide to Programmable Video Games by the staff of Electronic Games, and then they talk about the history of Pong. Again, guys, check out this magazine just for the pure history. You'll just get an education. If you've missed all this stuff, if you're younger than me, then you might have missed all these early things. If you're interested in it, pick up Electronic Games magazine. We'll look at the arcade awards here. Who won? Best Pong variant went to Video Olympics from Atari. Best sports football game. Best target game, ESC Battle, which was Atari. Cosmic Conflict on the Odyssey 2, God knows. Best solitaire game, Golf on the Odyssey 2. Wouldn't know anything about that. Most innovative game was basketball on the Atari, and that would have been the 2600, and even the version on the 400, 800 was awesome fun. I used to play that a lot with my friends. Game of the year was Superman. Now that's a game I haven't really played. And then again, this is 1981. Best target war game was Armored Battle by Mattel. So that would have been on the ColecoVision, I think. And best Pong variant, volleyball on the Odyssey 2. Again, wouldn't have done that. Best space shooter game, Space Battle on Mattel. Don't know anything about that. Audio visual effect, Fishing Derby. Well, that's interesting. I haven't played Fishing Derby before by Activision. Might check that out sometime. The skiing game by Activision was the best says solitaire game. Must be like solo game. It feels like feather light joystick controls, superb graphics and whooshing sound effects combined to create a game so realistic that some players have suffered wind burn on the electronic slopes. Best innovative game was Adventure by Atari. My God, that first fantasy game. It was the first one that Atari released on their side. So, and then it says, note, arcade awards were also given for the best coin-op electronic games. Space Invaders won in 1980, and yes, Asteroids took the prize in 1981. Whew, a very, very early kickoff. A nice picture of an Atari VCS. I would have been absolutely jealous looking at all those games at the back there. And there's Superman. So they were talking about Superman on the VCS then, by the looks of things. I would fire that up on the emulator, guys, and check that out. Missile Command was a favourite of mine, and the version on the VCS was actually pretty good. They cover more of the games there: Space Invaders, Pong, Superman, Breakout, Missile Command. They talk about all of the games there in some detail. And then over to Activision. and tennis and fishing derby. There's laser blast again, and boxing, and down the bottom custom control with stick. Here we have the Channel F, or funnily enough, the Channel F, the Fairchild system. You know, such a unique console back then. I didn't really hear much about it at all. I probably completely glossed over this at the time. I've since seen it, and you know, when people are doing emulation stations and showing all the different systems, and I can see that the Channel F in there. I remember looking it up like several years ago going, what the hell is a Channel F? So funnily enough, you know, here it is being covered, and again, very, very basic software, and it just didn't really take off. Over to the Odyssey 2 system, covering off different games there with basketball, computer golf, Quest for Rings, a lot of basic sort of games. Then into the Mattel. I remember that auto racing and just thinking that was wicked. Professional arcade upgrades to a computer. Oh my goodness, what is this? Professional arcade system is a modular system. So again, so many sort of attempts to try and, you know, squeeze into the market with something unique and innovative. And here we have an article, which systems for you? And it looks at the scoreboard chart, and it's comparing the Atari VCS or 2600 against the Odyssey 2 against the television. The Activision, so I don't even remember what that is. And then the Channel F, which we just covered. And you can see that the Atari VCS really comes in with excellent across most games. And we've got a coverage here on the Quest for the Rings, which looks like, what was that? Was that for the Odyssey 2 again? And then we get over to Missile Command and Kaboom. Kaboom was a pretty popular game on the VCS. And we're covering auto racing again. We've got stuff on Missile Command. Space Invaders, auto racing, air sea battles, the same old names coming up again and again earlier on in the piece. Gosh, more on air sea battle through to Breakout, Pong, so much info here, guys, if you're interested. Boxing, Alien Invaders, Space Battle, Video Whizball, and then we're getting into the back end of the magazine. We're making fun of television, electronic games. And of course you could mail in and get a subscription to your magazine and have it delivered to you. Computer Playland, well here we go, the whole section here, a whole article on that fantastic game that I was talking about in terms of Star Raiders, just absolutely awesome. And we move on to bowling and of course very basic on the VCS. What else we got here? Sands of Mars, never heard of that. House of Usher, oh my goodness. Nomino's Jigsaw, Space Chase tends to ring a bell, but there was just so many space type, you know, games with space in it. War at Sea, don't remember that. Alien Rain, Asteroid Field. What's this ad here? Mystery Funhouse. I think it's just a bit of artwork. Empire Over the Mind. Wow. That was for Apple II and the Atari 800. The Pet Commodore and the Trash 80. No, never played that either, actually, back in the day. Dino Wars they talk about. And then we get into what's new in the arcades. And this was the area, guys, that I used to just absolutely crave to read, you know, the new arcade games. And the first thing, one up, is how incredible is this? Is talking about, and I'll say Plaids is how or Pleads. Yeah, what an amazing game that was as it was coming out over the back of, you know, Space Invaders, Asteroids and Missile Command. And what else was released here? Space Odyssey. And it's funny, it says Space Odyssey is capable of generating 256 hues of colour. Amazing. It says, like the popular Defender, Space Odyssey lets arcaders Space Odyssey, well, that's an interesting one. I have to play Space Odyssey. I have to play that on MAME at some point. It says it's like a Defender-like game. Venture by Exidy. Actually, I haven't really played that much either. Core Cabinet, a Upright Warlords. We can't really play, I mean, you can play Warlords Upright, right, guys, with 2 players, but it's a 4-player game. You can put 4 controllers on that, so really you want to enjoy 4. Lords of Karma, right? So that was just the coin-op stuff. Now we're back into computer playland. So this is an Atari 800 and Pet TRS-80 game. There's horse racing, Gorgons, Space Trader. That was on the Trash 80, on the TRS-80. Now we get into those little standalone console things. Dark Tower challenges adventurers. Dark Tower, a fantasy adventure born of electronic wizardry. I never saw that back in the day. Bank Shot for electronic pool. Tell you what, that Dark Tower looks pretty cool. First computerized fantasy board game. So mixing again the electronics and the original board games. Then we got Alien Attack. Check out this 10-pin game. Oh my goodness, so many little handhelds. Wildfire. Own your own arcade game. Most popular type of coin-op video game among private collectors is still the cocktail or table model. And yeah, and again, you know, those are the ones that was what I played back in those restaurants. Those were the ones that seemed more accessible and would be really, really cool in your house. It says, of course, no coin-op game is cheap. The newer, still popular games cost anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 new. And that would be US dollars. And again, back then, multiplying it out, you know, you're probably looking around about $9,000 for a game, you know, equivalent of today's money. It was expensive. And then we have a look at a couple of these games here. Again, these are ones that we really need to get onto maybe at some point, guys, and just sort of relive what was available around at the time. You know, just thinking about those early games. Got a Starhawk, Boot Hill, Targ, Night Driver, Football, Video Pinball. That's beautiful. We talked about Video Pinball before. Battlezone. And it's got prices on here too. How cool is that? So that Boot Hill from Midway was actually pretty cheap, or $3.95. Again, could have been like about $1,000 maybe. The Night Driver, I remember playing that. You know, Atari, $400. Video Pinball was $6.95. Battlezone though, $2,000. Wow. And then the classic Breakout as well. Then some Lunar Lander on the 400, 800. Scott Adams. And Scott Adams was super popular with all his adventure series. Got to cover that another time. But Lunar Lander, what an awesome game that was. Wildfire, didn't end up playing that. Super Breakout was an extension of the original Breakout. I remember playing that. And we're over to the Electronic Games Hotline, continue from 16, so there was some more support type of course you didn't have like support, like you didn't have Google, you know, to look up stuff on the internet. You had to ask questions, you had to write your questions into the magazines, guys, and wait for them to publish it, and then release the following month and pick it up and get your answer. That's how. Some more cool art, some football art. And here we go into touch. And of course, I've not been a big American football. I grew up in New Zealand, moved to Australia, but of course, American football wasn't really featured anywhere. A few more handhelds here. Just so many of these handhelds. I wonder how many of those hit the trash. Chess robots. Gosh, there's all these chess computers. Oh my goodness, just a ton of those. And then we had a reader poll. This was the, you know, like this, the feedback, and you had to fill it in and send it back. Feel free to photocopy this page. Back in the days of photocopiers. And we have a little ad saying for the next one on sale, January 14, 1982 is the next version of Electronic Games, and it talks about the history of video games. It talks about the 1982 Arcade Awards, the Hall of Fame, how video games are made. Just such a great video game magazine. Really was. And then we finish up on these final pages here, arcading on the Big Apple in New York. And check that out. What is that? Space Tactics, it says on there. And of course, I think that's the Sega machine, and they've extended it out on the photo. Surely they have. How cool is that? It's a Space Fury, Wizard of War Defender. So some cool insight to some of the arcade stuff. Broadway Arcade Amusement Centre. And it's so sad that a lot of these arcade venues are no longer available. Space Odyssey, and then finishing up on the last page, we are on Activision's Kaboom, that very, very popular game from Activision. And there you go, guys. So again, you know, just really stop and think about that in terms of that was the catalogue of information. That's all you had. You couldn't go search for more. And, you know, lying back, and I do seriously, do vividly remember being just so absorbed into this information and just being so, you know, my imagination just being fired up, thinking about these games and the new stuff coming out in the arcades, and when I'd possibly see it, you know, and you go out to your local shops and you just be amazed when the next arcade machine turned up, and that was, you know, that was the reality. You know, just that one game turning up on that one day, not like today, you know, hop on with an iPad and scroll through hundreds of thousands of apps. You know, we have just a glut of entertainment available to us today, and it's just not the same, you know. So I think I'll leave it there. It's probably been a pretty long video getting through that, but I hope you've joined me on the way through, and thanks if you have. And if you liked the video, then please give it a like, and of course if you want to follow me doing all sorts of other stuff in here, then please do subscribe and join the journey along with everyone else. Until next time, guys, make sure you look after yourselves, play your games. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, ciao for now.
You belong.